We all want to belong. And belonging is so often an extension of community. And how do we feel like we belong in a community? We know how it feels. We know it when we experience it. And sometimes we struggle to build that sense of community and belonging that we all desire. That's why I'm so grateful to have two guests here today with us whose job and passion is about building communities of belonging. They are changing the conversation in Central Indiana and beyond. So welcome today to Brandi Davis-Handy, the Chief Public Relations Officer for AES, and Brian Payne, the CEO of the Central Indiana Community Foundation. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's
Thanks for having us.
Well, there's a thought that community is broken in America. What do you think about that? Is that true?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I don't think that it's broken, but I think it's about getting back to the heart of what is community, and it starts with community as people, and so having kind of a shared respect for who we are as individuals, what we all bring to the table, and how we're truly listening to our friends, our family, and our neighbors. I think once we get to the heart of that, we get back to the heart of community.
What does community mean to you, Brian?
Community means, it means how do we gather together? And what are my values of my individualism versus my values of being with others and serving others and convening with others, gathering with others? I'm someone who actually really values my own individualism, as most Americans do, but I also try to find the right balance between what serves me and my interests, but what serves the community. And I think that's a challenge. I don't think community's broken. It's not broken in Central Indiana. I think civic discourse and civil discourse are broken. But when you get beyond the national landscape and you find a place like Indianapolis or Central Indiana where people still are willing to be nice to each other and create a sense of belonging, even if we have differences generally. I mean, it's getting a little rougher around here too, but generally I'm still pretty optimistic about the fact that we can continue to build community.
Well, I think what's dominating the headlines right now is people saying, I don't feel heard in my community, right? We see this in employees who are leaving their organizations, to start their own businesses or work somewhere else. We see this in the civil unrest, a response to not feeling seen and heard. I mean, as community builders, what would you offer as the path forward in such the face of daunting, unrest and what feels like a growing gap between the people who are talking and the people who are listening?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at Brian because I think, and I've, from the outside in, being able to look at some of the transformation under Brian's leadership at the Central Indiana Community Foundation, it's been great to see how I think that they've approached looking at the future and solving problems by really getting at the heart of that, which is people, and really hearing from people what they want, what they need. I've found in my role, working for an organization that invests a lot in the community, serving on a number of boards, but sometimes looking around in those places and spaces where everyone is well-intentioned and is wanting to do the right thing, but also wondering, do we have the right people at the table? I recently went through a poverty simulation exercise, which really touched me, and I've been through a number, kind of in my lifetime, but this one touched me in a different way because during our recap of the exercise, I was listening to the experiences that others that were participating in the simulation had, and listening in on some of the ways they approached it and the questions that they asked. And I just had this moment where I thought, am I living in a bubble? Because that didn't even dawn on me. And I walked away from that thinking I can translate that same emotion to the work that I'm doing in the community. And so I may have a view or perception of what I think could be good for an organization or a community, but if you are not there and you're not having those everyday experiences, or you're not the recipient of those services, do you truly know what's best? And so that's why it's important to have a diverse group of people sitting around that table and having those open conversations. And that's something that I think that I've viewed over the last, maybe 4 or 5 years of some great things that's happening at CICF.
Well, how do we close the gap on access? Because what you're saying is the people whose voices we need to hear don't always have access to the people who need to listen that can make decisions that lead to changes. What advice would you offer to us on how
So,
to address that?
One of the things I've been taught over the last 5 years is to ask who's not at the table. Like, you look around, you know who's at the table, but who's missing from the table? Who needs to be here to share a different life experience, a different perspective than the people that, the limited perspective we might have? Certainly, in this country, I would say we got ahead of this. We got ahead of the racial reckoning at the Central Indiana Community Foundation. We started this journey in 2015, 2016, of really focusing on equitable opportunity for all, no matter race, place, or identity. And we kind of in a way lucked into that, and then got smart and leaned into it. But certainly, there's a lot of people missing from the table in this country, and still today. But I think in a lot of places, because I came from a National Community Foundation conference, and each of the largest 40 community foundations in this country are all working on racial equity now, and they're all asking similar questions. So who's missing? I would say one thing is that we kind of have rules of engagement, and one of the really important rules of engagement is ask clarifying questions and quit making assumptions. And of the last 24 people that we've hired since the pandemic broke out, we've hired 24 people. We've grown, actually, and certainly people have left. 18 are people of color, 6 people are white. So we are now a very racially diverse organization at every level. But you know where the misunderstandings are? Generational. Not that everything's perfect from a racial perspective, but you know what? Most of the tension we have is from the 4 different generations that are in the workplace together. And they have different assumptions about everything. And they have different styles, and they have different perspectives. And too often we don't ask clarifying questions.
Well, along the line of asking great questions, I mean, you were both posing the question, who is missing from the table, or who else needs to be at the table? What are some of the other questions you believe we all need to be asking as we're thinking about building communities of belonging? I mean, what are the questions we need to ask that aren't being asked enough at this point?
I think one of the things that we talked a lot about recently and learned recently, so we're always learning every day, is like, who's proximate to the problem? Right? Who's close to the problem? I think one of the biggest challenges with our politics now is that, a lot of Congress people are not really staying proximate to their constituents, right? They get to DC, they get locked into the DC thing. Certainly our senators, right? 2 senators in the state, many of them focused on things that have nothing to do with our state. They are no way close to what's going on in a neighborhood, a black or a brown or even a white neighborhood. They don't know what's going on. And yet they're making big decisions every day that affects people's lives. Same at the State House. How many people are really proximate to the neighborhoods?
Well, I found corporate politics are the same way, right? I mean, we have people who are removed, and that can be any of us, removed from the customers that we're serving. I mean, how do we get closer to the people we serve?
Yeah, it starts with conversations. And I mean, I see that every day in the work that we do, overseeing our community relations efforts. Each year, we take a look around our service territory and decide what are the volunteer opportunities where we want to bring our people together. We want to make sure that we're giving back to our community. But we really shifted how we approach that work probably 5 or 6 years ago, because we realized, while well-intentioned and going out and having and going about these projects, are we really sitting down with the residents and those in the community to say, what are the outcomes you want to see? What do you need in this neighborhood? Like, what would be a great outcome if we were able to bring something new or refresh or refurbish something in this park? What would it be? Instead of us coming in and saying, you know what, I think it would be really great if we brought this to you. And so it really just starts with having simple conversations.
Well, and what you're really describing that just showed up for me in that moment was this life cycle of how do we move from intention to Instagram to impact, right? I mean, how do we go from this, I want to help, I intend to help, to I'll show up at the company day of service and take the nice photo and put on Instagram and talk about the cause, International Women's Day, neighborhood beautification, or anything else, to real impact? I mean, how do we close the gap between intention and impact in a thoughtful way?
So the way that we think about this, again, that we've learned over the last 5 years, as a community foundation, as a grant maker, as an organization that gets involved in community leadership, it's an organization that helps people figure out their philanthropy and make their philanthropy more meaningful to them and more impactful in the community, that's what we do, is that we have to get beyond transactions and get into relationship. So to really understand how to make a difference, we have to get into deep, authentic relationships. And here's what I've learned as a white person. Like Brandi and I, if we just met and kind of like clicked, and I'd say, hey, we ought to go out to lunch and talk about our shared interests in the community. Mm-hmm. As a white person, after a lunch, I might think, oh my gosh, yeah, that was awesome. I got a new friend. We really hit it off. We can be partners. And as a black person in this country, she's probably thinking, okay, that guy maybe has some potential, and we'll see if he hangs around. We'll see if he shows up again. That as a white person, I have the privilege of kind of instant trust. And as a black person in this country, you don't have that advantage because you've been burned too many times. Mm. So we have to learn how to get into deep, authentic relationship with each other. And I have to learn that I have to earn that by keep showing up in spaces. One of the things that I'm really aware of now is I don't want to show up in all white spaces anymore. Mm. I've done that. I've done that for a lot of my career. And now I'm aware of it. And when I show up at an event or a gala or someone's house party, and it's all white people, it's like I'm in the wrong space.
Hybrid work. Employees want it, employers need it, and everyone has questions. When done right, facilitating flexible work can be a win-win for everyone. Happier employees, engaged teams, and better business outcomes. Robin is here to make the logistics easy. Our all-in-one workplace experience platform helps thousands of companies reimagine their approach to work. To learn more about how we make hybrid work work, visit robinpowered.com.
Well, and when I come to the intersection of your lives, I mean, you're both interested in community building, but I think, Brandi, you challenged Brian to consider or reconsider who he was listening to and how he might change the conversation. So how did you direct him to get some new points of view in the community?
Well, I would say Brian really challenged me to look at how I was engaging with people in the community in a different and more meaningful way. I mean, I think we both went through an experience through executive, community leadership program, and Brian was my mentor, and hearing from him how he was really stepping out and going into places that were, I don't want to tell your story, that were new to you, and doing things as simple as sitting down and having dinner with people that he had just met and people who didn't look like him and had different experiences, how that really changed his view on a number of things. And I'll let you tell your story, Brian, but I think it did.
Well,
yeah, take us to one of those dinners of discovery.
Well, first of all, our intersection, actually, Kathy's mom used to work at Central Indiana Community Foundation with me. So, and then she retired, but I had never met Brandi until
our viewers probably don't know Kathy, so tell us about her.
Kathy Davis is my mom.
There you go. Okay, so mom is
I used to work with her mom.
Okay.
And then we did the Stanley K. Lacey Executive Leadership. It's it's like Leadership Indianapolis. Like every city has these. They're all a little bit different in their style. But I did that in 1995-96 as a young man. And then I got to be the old guy moderator in 2016, 20 years after I did it. And Brandi was the young woman, one of 25 young people in the program. And the timing couldn't have been better for me because we just started to launch our own learning journey at CICF, Central Indiana Community Foundation, around our racial equity understanding. And we had about 6 or 7 awesome leaders of color. And I got the whole year was themed around racial equity. So everything that I was learning, I got to kind of share with 25 brilliant leaders. Many of them were people of color, and got into relationship. And so Brandi did form, and her colleagues did form a lot of my thinking that year. That was a very powerful year. And it was also a year where it was our 100th anniversary of the Indianapolis Foundation part of us. And we had these, what we called our Ben Franklin dinners. It's a long story about what Ben Franklin did, but he actually left his money in his estate for 100 years out and 200 years out. And so we created funds that will not be spent and will just grow in the stock market for the next 100 years and 200 years. And so we had dinners to cast a vision. What do we think our city, state, and country will be like, or what do we want it to be like 100 years from now? And those dinners were really transformative, but they were very diverse, and you met people, and you got proximate to people that you didn't know before.
And I attended one of those dinners, and there's a group of friends that I have that even kind of after that moment, we've continued that tradition of whether it's hosting dinners and inviting new people. Hey, I think that this person would have a great connection with this other friend for a different reason. But that experience for me, I think, has really helped shape my approach to community leadership and understanding that, back to your initial question of how do we have a greater impact, and I think in order to get to that place of impact and outcomes that will make everyone happy is getting all of the stakeholders around the table. And just if you're able to build that roadmap together, you're going to be in a better place. So, instead of me saying, hey, we need a volunteerism project, we're going to go into this park, let's sit. Let's talk to whether it's the Parks Alliance, whether it's the residents, whether it's the utility, all of those, and what would a great outcome be for be for each stakeholder, and how do we build that plan together? And it's as simple as that, but it's just so interesting how. And so there are so many scenarios where we don't start from that place of just basic understanding and alignment.
Well, I'm hearing you say dinner is a disarming place to start a conversation, especially if it's inside of someone's home. I mean, what would it look like if we all had our own dinner series of people who looked or behaved or had different choices than we would make on a regular basis? Now, I'm curious, there are often questions that people want to ask someone about these big, difficult topics. And they stop just short because we're afraid we might offend someone with a question we ask. How do you ask authentic questions that really get at the heart of what people care about in a way that elicits people to open up instead of close down? I mean, you've both just spent a couple years doing this.
So again, I think it gets easier when you build trust with someone, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, like if you just meet someone and at a very first dinner party and you're seated, something like let's say I'm seated next to some black guy who I've never met before. I'm very comfortable now having that conversation, but I'm not going to, in that first meeting, I'm not going to go too deeply into, questions because I don't have a relationship yet. I don't have a sense of trust. But if we connect, we make a connection and we follow up and decide to have lunch or drink together, then I can start maybe asking some questions or getting a perspective from him that I didn't feel quite comfortable at because I didn't want to overstep. So it's not a one-time thing. It's like anything else, right? I mean, the depth comes through spending time and connecting and showing up. We say our job at the Community Foundation now often is to just show up and shut up, right? We used to think that we were the experts on everything, and now we know that people living in neighborhoods, in black and brown neighborhoods, they're the experts. Now we have a network, we have connection to resources, we can be helpful, but it's not about what my idea is for that neighborhood. It's what do they want in their neighborhood? And then can I show up, get into relationships so they trust me enough to actually tell me so they don't think they're wasting their time with me? And then can I add some value through maybe sometimes knowledge, but more often maybe just connection or network to resources.
When we read about, equity in the workplace or what's happening with poverty or, what it's like to live in our communities, and we see that we want something different, sometimes people lose hope. I mean, they give up because they feel like that interaction is not going to make a difference, or in some cases, we're actually going backwards. How do you maintain hope amidst all these setbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's signs of hope everywhere. I mean, I feel just in my everyday, when I show up in the workplace, where I'm showing up in the community, there's absolutely a change and a shift. And I think conversations like this is the hope, and the fact that we're keeping this top of mind. I mean, one thing you just said that really hit upon me when you think about like equity and what that means in the workplace is, I have talked about this a lot internally, and like there's a lot that we're doing to make sure that we are increasing our diversity, making sure that we are opening opportunities, but we have to always keep in mind that if you look across our organization, that people are coming from a different place in terms of like what you think equity is. And so it's one thing to say we want to bring in more people into our organization, we want to bring into more people to our our community organization, our board, but are we really giving them the opportunity to have a voice and be heard forward and have an impact. And that's something that all of us collectively need to ensure that we're holding each other accountable, because we all are coming from different places and spaces with different experiences. And I still think that there's a long way to go in that respect.
One of the themes that I've kind of focused on and keeps coming up in my life in so many different ways. Of course, my radar is wide open now, so I'm like bringing it in. But, you know, you can choose love or you can choose fear. And a couple of my heroes these days are Bryan Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy, and the Hollywood movie was made of that. And then he's the brains behind the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, where he has this incredible museum and what's called the Lynching Memorial as a shortcut. And we've experienced that, which is a very profound kind of framing of racial history in this country. And Bryan Stevenson, though he's witnessed or caused the bearing of witness to all these horrible acts of violence against black people. He's a black man, of course. And yet he brings an incredible amount of hope and love to the work. So he has seen the worst of human action, and yet he somehow still chooses love over fear without without denying all the horrible things that have happened to black people in this country. But he still brings love to the, love and spirit and spirituality to the work. And he just ignites hope in people. There's a couple other, a woman named Angela Glover Blackwell, who's a national figure and a black woman who created this organization called Policy Link. I just heard her speak a couple weeks ago. And she brings 75 years old, been in the fight of civil rights since she was 18, so 57 years. And she still speaks with so much hope and love. And I sometimes start to lose hope on some things, and it's like, who am I, as a privileged white guy, to lose hope when Angela Glover Blackwell can bring hope after 57 years of fighting the fight as a black woman. So I think we got to pay attention to the people who have been in the fight, who can still bring love and hope and inspiration, even in the worst of times.
Progress is possible. And what today's conversation reminded me is that the past can remind us it doesn't have to define us. And what gives me hope from our conversation with Bryan and with Brandi today is that we can all choose to change the conversation. Just one conversation at a time. Ask, don't answer. And it's amazing what we might discover as a result. Thanks so much for being here today.